So, quote-unquote fanboys are furious with Michael Bay again. What else is new? Well, this time it's not about his incredibly awful Transformers movies for starters. See, last week Bay was speaking at the Nickelodeon Channel's Upfront presentation as part of the rollout for the company's big media push for all their new projects based around the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brand, which Nick just finished paying a small fortune to acquire. Why was Michael Bay there? Why, he showed up unannounced to lobby for the rest of Salute Your Shorts to be released on DVD, of course. Not just kidding. Bay was there because in addition to directing bad movies for Steven Spielberg and Jerry Bruckheimer, he runs the production company Platinum Dunes, which is producing a new live-action Turtles movie for 2013, set to be directed by Battle LA and Wrath of the Titans helmer Jonathan Liebsman. When describing the plot of the new film, which unlike the recent animated feature will not tie into the earlier movies, Bay had this to say about the iconic title characters. These turtles are from an alien race, and they are going to be tough, edgy, funny, and completely lovable. So the turtles are aliens now? Sure sounded like it. Fans reacted with what could be called the predictable outrage that greets a proposed major change to the mythos of pop iconography, ranging from the reasonable to the, less than reasonable. Now, to be fair, it's increasingly plausible that this is all being taken out of context. Bay is only the film's producer, after all. He's not writing the screenplay or even directing it himself, and it's pretty damn likely that he's not hugely familiar with the characters to begin with. Geek culture website BadassDigest.com pointed out that alien-related origins aren't exactly, well, alien to the franchise to begin with. In the original Mirage comic books that preceded the more widely seen animated and feature film versions of the characters, it was ultimately revealed that the ooze responsible for creating the turtles was tied to a chemical company that was actually a front for the Utrom, a small blob-like race of alien invaders who rode around in humanoid robotic bodies and served as the inspiration for the probably more well-known character of Krang on the animated series, thus raising the possibility that perhaps Bay misspoke and what's really being referred to is this alien-related origin being used for the new film, perhaps with the Utroms or even Krang himself as the bad guys. Yes, I know the Utroms also turned up in person on the more recent cartoon, and thus concludes my obligation to mention said lackluster but well-intentioned series that I just never particularly cared for. A few days later, in an interview with Collider, director Liebsman echoed this basic sentiment without actually confirming or denying anything because, well, why would he? This is the most publicity this production has received so far. Now, speaking only for myself, at this juncture I don't really think it matters whether they futz with the origin story or not. I mean, yes, making them part of some alien race would be stupid, because part of the point of these characters is that they were ordinary pet store turtles, made extraordinary through sheer chance, thus lacking the tired-ass predestination chosen one bullshit that crops up in so many other franchises. But the fact is, even with the proper origin story, this movie is still probably gonna suck by virtue of being made by the same basic entities that already screwed up Jason, Freddy, Leatherface, and Optimus Prime. But yeah, I'm kinda hoping it doesn't go down this way, and maybe this level of negative fan reaction pre-release is a reason why it doesn't. That said, if it does go down this way, and I do get a crummy new origin story in my crummy new Ninja Turtles movie, I can tell you what I won't do about it. I won't pitch a big whiny crybaby hissy fit, demand that the origin be fixed to my specifications, claim that I deserve an equal or greater say as to what shape it takes as the filmmakers because I happen to be a fan of the material, and file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. In other words, I won't be doing what a depressingly large number of Mass Effect fans have been doing in the wake of being disappointed with the ending of the third game. Now don't worry, I'm not going to dwell on the Mass Effect mess, it just kind of worked out that these two things happened at the same time. But in any case,
this is why we can't have nice things.
See, folks, this is one of those how to be a fan and a grown-up things that geek culture has always had a problem with, and it's gotten worse now that we have the internet to act as an echo chamber of mutual butthurt outrage. The fact is, fandom does not equal ownership. You don't have creative rights to something that someone else made just because you like it a whole lot. This is very basic stuff. The audience for things like books, movies, video games, etc. are not entitled to have them meet every single expectation. You buy your ticket, you take your chances. Otherwise, no one would ever take any kind of creative risk. And risk is what both making and enjoying art and entertainment is all about. Making something that really represents your vision means accepting the risk that not everyone is going to like it. If you're just making what you've already determined everyone will like, it's probably not going to be very good. Same thing goes for the consumer side. Without the risk involved with not knowing whether or not you'll ultimately like something, a lot of the fun and excitement of experiencing it is gone. And while the pre-assurance that you're more likely to enjoy something because you've been enjoying it is a key part of being a fan, one must not forget that the aforementioned risk dynamic is probably why your property of choice was good enough to make you a fan in the first place. Now, that's not to say that you're not supposed to criticize things you don't like, you just have to know where the line is between critiquing the handling of a property and asserting non-existent rights of ownership. And not just because it makes you look silly. The only way to ensure that we get great works of art in any medium is to ensure that the artists making it know they are as free as possible to take chances. And yes, that means sometimes Michael Bay gets to botch up a perfectly good origin story, or a video game might end in a way you don't like very much. And if either of those are the worst disappointments in your life at any given moment, well, you're actually doing pretty damn good. Last week, we spoke a little bit about the mounting fandom outcry over rumored changes to the central mythology of the Michael Bay-produced, Jonathan Liebesman-directed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot, which has apparently now been rechristened as just Ninja Turtles, by the way, but everyone only wanted to talk about the other thing mentioned in that episode, or so it seemed. But me, I still find the Turtles conundrum to be kind of interesting in its own right, and since it's only a matter of time before the first horrible-looking screenshots wind up online, and it starts looking crappy for real rather than just crappy in theory, let's go back to that well. Now, what's interesting about the way quote-unquote Turtlegate has played out for me is the way that it places a spotlight on the occasionally awkward relationship of fans to their various fixations. The wrath unleashed in this case was utterly textbook. Bay implied a fairly substantial change to the original mythology of the characters, and fans devoted to said original mythology cried foul. What makes it a special case, though, is that the version of the characters that the vast majority of fans are so protective of is not actually the original mythology. Oh yeah, let's get clear on this point right off the bat. Can we please stop with the revisionist history posing, internet? If every single Generation X Ninja Turtles fan who says now that they were into the original underground comic book versions first actually had been, Eastman and Laird would have been able to retire in matching golden houses before they'd signed a single merchandising deal, so please cut it out. Ahem. Most fans of the Ninja Turtles who came up in the 1980s were likely first introduced to the characters by the cartoon series, the action figures, or the various popular video games, all of which maintained a mostly consistent universe and character roster. Leader, Nerd, Wolverine, Jeff Spicoli, Mr. Miyagi, Hotter Lois Lane, Fifth Ranger, Ooze, Masks, Bad Guy, Bigger Bad Guy, Henchman, etc., much of which eventually made their way into a pair of decent live-action movies and a third live-action movie
that must never be mentioned again.
Turtle merchandise was everywhere in the mid-1980s, and the sharper-eyed kids prone to devouring such sundry amusements would often note that some of the graphic elements used to create the merch looked a little off. Case in point, the original game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Badass cover, to be sure, but why are they all wearing Raphael's colors? Come to think of it, you'd see them all wearing red on a lot of the merchandise. Now, at the time, most younger kids probably didn't know what to make of that, though by now they've probably sussed it out if they still care. The NES cover, and most of all the other all-red merch, was using recycled artwork produced for the original comic books published by Mirage. This original iteration of the characters had been aimed at older audiences and an underground comics readership, a black-and-white parody of the teenager, ninja, and mutant fixations dominating mainstream comics at the time, and of Frank Miller's Daredevil run in particular. The Turtles, dark and gritty. Shredder, not terribly important. Krang, Bebop, and Rocksteady didn't exist. The version of the characters in their universe that most of my generation grew up on, and thus the one that people tend to be angry about Bay and Platinum Dunes supposedly deviating from, was itself more or less an entirely alternate adaptation, developed by a creative team hired to develop a promotional animated miniseries by Playmates, then a small toy company who'd licensed the characters for action figures but wanted TV exposure because even popular independent comic books didn't actually sell all that much. Said miniseries became a huge hit, spun off into a massively popular series, and turned Playmates' modest investment into one of the most popular toy lines of all time. And thus this version, and its rapidly expanding universe, continuity, and character roster, became the Ninja Turtles as far as most of the popular culture was concerned. Though, to be fair, the movies did split the difference by using the four Turtles' personalities from the cartoon, but shaping the rest of the movie slightly closer to the Mirage books. Now, this sort of thing actually happens more often than you'd think. For example, you probably think of the Riddler and the Penguin as being among the core or foundational Batman villains, right? And they both did originate in the early days of that character, but they actually weren't all that popular, remained pretty obscure, and rarely appeared in any comics after that. The reason that anyone today knows who they are at all is because they were used on the 1960s Adam West Batman series, and became so popular there that DC brought them back. That same series was also responsible for resurrecting Catwoman, who had been totally absent from the comics for over a decade because DC worried she was too sexualized to exist under the Comics Code Authority censorship guidelines established in the mid-1950s. Hell, that show show invented Mr. Freeze. Loosely based on an obscure villain named Mr. Zero, he was otherwise an original creation from the series, later exported back into the comics. You see, guys, fandom often isn't just about whatever it started being about, it's also about itself. And as such, fandoms often end up creating a fan consensus about what is and isn't essential about a property that doesn't necessarily reflect the original version it's often claimed to. For example, as far as I'm concerned, in my heart of hearts, the Mario Brothers come from Brooklyn. I know that was never officially made part of the game's canon, but it was the backstory of pretty much every narrative version of the characters Nintendo officially licensed back in the day, and I'll always consider that to be the story. See also, I will never ever call this person Eggman. Now, that's not to say that ham-fisted desecrations like the Halle Berry Catwoman or Michael Bay's own abominable Transformers movies don't more than deserve the lashings they take for throwing out anything resembling what inspired them, just that fan culture would occasionally do well to step back and consider whether or not this or that element is fundamental to a franchise, or merely fundamental to their preferred understanding of it, and to be fair, also consider whether or not that makes a difference. But you're probably still going to ask what I'd want to see happen to the Turtles. Honestly, a good movie as far as my professional opinion goes. More specifically, well, call it nostalgia, call it confirmation bias, call it whatever you want, but having gone over the bulk of material available for its various incarnations, I really do think this version of the Turtles holds up better than most of the others. It had its share of problems, mostly because of the Byzantine strictures placed on animated TV shows at the time, but it had a sense of personality that was often lacking from the Mirage comics, though those were good in their own right, and a sincerity and charm largely missing from the overly self-conscious 2003 series. So if I was producing a movie, I'd probably start from there, yeah, if for no other reason than we've yet to see Bebop, Rocksteady, or Krang in live action. But that's just me. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.